Hey everyone, happy November. Welcome to my channel, Books, Gurrs, and Purrs. My name is Leslie, and this segment is going to be one part of possibly one of three or one of four. So for the month of November, I participated in the Skoden Readathon, hosted by and created by Kim of Native Lady Book Warrior. And so I tried to read a book for every prompt instead of combining the prompts. And I said try because I'm still kind of in the middle of it, but I don't want one massive video that's going to be really long. So I'm just cutting up into sections and releasing them as I go along. So one of the prompts is short story or poetry. And so I read Sherman Alexi's The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven. This was the 20th anniversary edition, and I didn't realize that this has been sitting on my shelf. It was one of those books I was actually going to plan to read next year because I have another one by the same author, but I thought it would be well suited for this readathon. So I read this short story collection. I absolutely enjoyed it, and what I didn't know was that at some point the stories become interlocked together. I'm not sure how the author does it, but he has a poetic sensibility to his prose. He has a way of writing metaphors that are just incredibly impactful, and I can't put my finger on it, but he really does an incredible job. On another note, I had no idea that this book was a basis for the movie Smoke Signals, and I love that movie, so that was a really cool fact to find out. All right, so I'll just give an example of stories that I really love in this collection. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I don't want to ruin the experience if you decide to read it. There is one that I marked, and even the title alone, it's called The Approximate Size of My Favorite Tumor. And so this author just has a very dark sense of humor. And so in this particular story, we get to see the beginnings of a relationship and how that relationship unfolds, and how the beginning of their relationship started with humor. Like the love for each other is rooted in humor, and how that humor from the main character can be destructive to the relationship, right? Because sometimes I believe his wife or his partner just feels like she just wants him to take certain moments seriously, and it seems like he's incapable of doing that. And I think that just comes from, when a person goes through a difficult thing, humor could definitely be a source of strength. It could be like a defense mechanism, a survival tactic. So I felt like I understood where the character was coming from, and I could see how that could become a problem when the character cannot let that part of them, that part of their shield down. It's just odd that it's so emotionally moving, but you're also laughing the whole time. It's really a testament to the author's writing. And also in terms of how the author writes, that really blew me away. And I feel like if I talk about it, it might come off too simply, but he has a way of picking words that are, let's say, a subject or an object, and then expanding on that. That says something greater, that's really impactful. I can't think of another word, or just really moving. So the author writes on page 123, I've got the DTs so bad, and the walls are Nazis making lampshades out of my skin, and the toilet is a white man in a white hood riding me down on horseback, and the floor is a skinny man who wants to teach me a trick he's learned to do with a knife, and my shoes squeal and kick and pull down into the dead pig pit of my imagination. And so I like the idea that he's giving objects life. I think it's personification. It's been a while. I'm a little bit rusty. But, and then there's one other section that I really liked that I wanted to read to you in terms of his writing. And it's on page 129. And the author writes, he says, "The earth is our grandmother, and that technology has become our mother, and that they both hate each other." So they're just, again, moments like that where he's using like an analogy or personification to get something that he wants to translate to the reader that is really just moving and eye-catching, and what he's trying to get across comes across so easily. Anyways, so yeah, I love this short story collection. I think I may have read this in a day. I could be wrong. I think it may have been 2 days. But that wasn't like because of a lack of caring for it. I think I was more under a time constraint. But yeah, I absolutely love the short story collection. Pick it up, read it. It's really good. All right, so the second one I'm going to talk about. All right, so Fresh Banana Leaves by Jessica Hernandez, PhD. I don't want to ruin the synopsis because I don't think I could do this book justice. Being someone that's not really, I don't go around reading like scientific journals, you know. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to reading the first paragraph and the back, and then I'll just kind of tell you how I felt about the material. Because if I try to summarize this, I really think I'm going to botch it up. And so the author summary on the back says, despite the fact that indigenous communities are among the most affected by climate devastation, indigenous science is nowhere to be found in mainstream environmental policy or discourse. And while holistic land, water, and forest management practices born from millennia of indigenous knowledge systems have much to teach all of us, indigenous science has long been ignored, otherized, or perceived as soft, the product of a systematic, centuries-long campaign of racism, colonialism, and extractive capitalism. And so that summarizes this book up more than I could. I love this book so much. I have like tabs all over the place, and there is a section, I think there's a couple of chapters that I feel like I want to go back to. I hybrid listened to this, read this, and I found that I would listen to this like on the way from dropping off my daughter at school, and I would come home and then I just go straight to the book and make notes and or reread sections, because I just felt like everything that the author was saying was so dynamic, and that I would grab my highlighter and highlight sections, and I had to like stop myself at some point because really this whole book could be pink with my highlight, because everything was just incredibly informative and I really appreciated it. Something that the author does throughout the books, which connects to the title, is she uses fresh banana leaves. I want to say as a metaphor, but here's the deal. It's part metaphor, part her reality, her family's reality. And so she tells a story of how it's a banana tree that saved her father. I don't want to give you all the details because I don't want to ruin it from when you reading it. But she starts out there from the trauma that her father went through, how it's nature that saved him, and because of that, she exists, right? Her father exists, so she exists. And there is this symbiotic or mutual contributions of the plants and humans in existence, right? And how, like in the Western colonial structure, we just look at the earth as resources, right? Something to take from and there's no give back. That's kind of like one of the things that really touched me. But this is something that I really appreciate about her writing, is that there are so many complex topics in this, but she breaks it down in a way that someone like me could understand what she's trying to say, especially with all her scientific knowledge. I could get why someone with all her, anyone in the scientific community trying to break that down for like in layman's terms could kind of get like lost, but that doesn't happen with her writing. It's really beautiful. And I think that contributes to why I was able to see how she lays out in an organized way the cycle of gaslighting and oppression of her indigenous scientific knowledge that's imposed by these like Western colonial structures. But as the author explains the damage that happens from this, she also provides like these alternative solutions. And in her work, she also provides testimonies. So she's interviewing people in like a research way. So as she's explaining information, we're getting like real life application through testimonies. After reading the author's book, I watched an interview. I'm gonna post it below because it's really good. There is something that she said that I don't think I remember reading it in the book, but she said something about how in writing this book, she was being very careful and cautious, because as she's trying to explain how her indigenous scientific knowledge is interlinked with other, like the plants, how there's this connection. She is also aware of like the stereotype that's been created that is a generalization, right? Where it's like, oh, all indigenous people have this connection, but that's not really true. And so trying to kind of navigate that and, be respectful and make sure that no one takes what she's saying and makes it seem like that particular stereotype has to be something that's so difficult to have to be aware of and try to navigate. And I think she did a really beautiful job. There are so many different parts I could read from in this book. And it was really hard to narrow it down because there's so much great information in here. So I'm just going to read about one paragraph that really exhibits her chipping away at history and finding an example of like horrific irony that really still marks us today. So on page 48, the author says, Seattle, for instance, is built on Duwamish lands, so Seattle has an interesting history with the Duwamish people. It was named after one of their chiefs, Chief Sealth, who in 1865 was not allowed to step foot in this city after Ordinance Law Number 5 was passed. This law banned Native Americans from the city limits. It was a way to get rid of the indigenous peoples of these lands in order to make space for what the colonizers had in mind to do with the city. The city that was named after a chief also became the same city that did not permit him or his people to step foot in it. The irony is that many people who reside in Seattle do not know this history because, unlike their Unlike settler history, indigenous history is something folks have to research. It is not as accessible or even integrated within the educational system the way colonial history is. So, again, this book is worth picking up. And also, if you don't even know really where to start to learn, find a way to find information about like an interconnected history. This is a great place to start, and I really loved it. The next book I read is Calling for a Blanket Dance by Oscar Hokia. This has been possibly one of my favorite books I've read this year. There's a couple that are at the top, but this one really takes the cake. I originally picked up this book just because I love the cover so much, and I made some assumptions because I was trying to figure out, okay, what about this cover tells me about the story, but I guessed all wrong. So as you look at the cover and you read through this book, there's a story behind the cover that is unraveled over time, and I thought it was really beautiful. To adulthood, Ever is someone that has Mexican ancestry on his dad's side and indigenous heritage on his mother's side. And so what I really enjoyed about this book that I wasn't expecting is that every chapter is a different character. And so when we're seeing Ever grow up, we're experiencing him through this peripheral lens of all these different characters that contributed to his life. And I thought that was really fitting because if you look on the cover, there's, what do you call it? I don't know the word for it, but you could see all these little dots on here. And whenever someone's making a dress or a blanket or whatever, there's like that graph. And so this is what this is, the graphing guide. And I feel like, oh, okay, that's kind of so true to life, right? It's family and community. That happens to be what it takes to raise a child into an adult. And so much like the patchwork that creates a quilt, right? It's all these different contributing factors that really contributes to someone growing up. And I thought that was really beautiful. Something about the writing that I really appreciated is that although this book is in English majority of the time, there's this toggling that happens naturally between Spanish and other indigenous language. So either it happens to be a character that's from the father's side of the family, or a member of the family that's either within Ever's community, or a family member that's indigenous, that's speaking in another language. So there's a constant toggling, and I felt like, oh, that's so true to life. Like it comes off very natural, and I say that because I'm Mexican American, and like it just reminded me of my childhood and hearing my uncles or certain family members talk, and then they would kind of like switch into like adding different words in within speaking English. And I just felt like there's a way that the author captures it that I don't know how else to say it, that just it feels natural. It doesn't feel like you're reading like I could visualize someone like, or hear them actually speaking, and it just felt very real. So I like the way that the author captured that. But what I also like about the author doing that is that he doesn't treat me as a reader, as the audience that's reading that, in a way that like I'm being talked down to, or like the material isn't being dumbed down for me. So in other words, while I say that the conversations are very natural, as you would hear like the banter in real life, he doesn't explain a lot. And I think that does two things. One, like I said, he's not dumbing down the material for me. And two, I feel like it's his way of being like, if you're interested in knowing what some of these words mean, do the research yourself. You can Google it, you know? And I like that, and I respect that too. I really love that about the way the author wrote. As we see Ever grow up, we do get to experience how there's corruption going on in different countries, in different varieties, for lack of the better words. And I like that we're confronted with that within a story. And something that the author does, but it's subtle, it's implicit, is he's actually describing in a way through this story why Ikwa is so important, and I appreciated the way that he did that. And yeah, especially what's going on right now, I really appreciated the story that the author is telling. I also appreciated how the author captured like the connection between culture and spirituality, as well as the complex dichotomy being from different cultural backgrounds. It was just, yeah, I just felt deeply connected to this story. I really loved it, and it's kind of hard to just like pinpoint one thing. There was just chapter after chapter. I felt very connected to the material, and there's even this one character, Leander, where when I finally got to his chapter, I think I was just getting like frustrated for the character, and there are just certain way in which this character functions that I related to, you know, and it just felt very in line with the messiness of humanity. So as far as digging into the story, I'm sorry, my foot fell asleep. In the first chapter, we are in the point of view of the grandmother, and we get to see like her wants for her own daughter and for her grandchild. And when I read this story initially, I didn't really understand in some ways where the grandma was coming from, other than being a mother that cares about her family, right? But through watching interviews with the author, I gained a little more knowledge and understanding that that the culture that the grandmother is from, it's a matriarchal structure, and so I think that the character comes off headstrong, but I don't think it's really that. I just think that within the structure of her own culture, that she thinks she's doing what's best for her family, right? She's being head of household. And I think I really appreciated the author expanding on that. And it's something that I want to learn more about. And in the second chapter, we get the point of view of the grandfather of Ever. And I really love this character because we're looking at someone that's been through a lot, and has become an alcoholic, and also sees how imperative it is that his grandkids experience traditions in his family. And I just thought, I really loved how complex every character is, and how just true to life. I don't know how else to say it, but I really love this book. I'm gonna keep saying it. All right, there are two different sections I'm gonna read from that just exhibit the relationships between the characters. So the first one is from the grandpa, when Ever is still a child, and he's taking them to an event to dance with them, or to teach them. And so the author writes, I kept glancing down at my grandsons. Ever's curly hair was a sharp contrast to his cousin's long, straight hair, but the two boys moved exactly the same. They had the same posture and concentration to the rhythm, with the same intensity. Their tiny hands barely held onto the large rattles they were carrying. Up and down they bobbed. I didn't have to explain any part of the dance to them. They watched me and the other men and mimicked us. I was amazed at how quickly they followed in my footsteps, and then it scared me. I thought that was really beautiful, because I can't quite tell if the grandfather is saying that this moment scares him because he's worried about them following in his exact footsteps because he's an alcoholic, or maybe it's the connection to their culture that they haven't really had a chance to practice until their grandfather interacts with them in this way. Yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was really beautiful, and it gives the reader a lot to think about. And then there's another part that I really liked, that kind of exhibits the toggling between languages. Or this is just the one I could kind of find off the top of my head for this video. And so I'm trying to remember which character. I think this might be Ever's cousin. And so the author writes, Ni modo, he'd told Ever, I witnessed the same defeat from my father. Everardo was on his way to drinking himself to death, hiding his failure inside empty beer bottles. We only hope to keep Ever from doing the same. And so, again, there's another character that we're reading from that has fears and hopes forever, and all he can do is observe, right, and contribute, and the rest is on Ever. And so I really love this book. I definitely think this is going to be a book that I'm going to turn back to a couple of times. It was just really beautiful, and I enjoyed the approach that the author took to experiencing the character. And so also below I'm gonna link a interview I found with the author. It's on YouTube. It's like you just hear like the audio of him. He's not on screen, but I thought it was a really insightful interview, and I think you'll really enjoy that too. So that's the end of this video. If you haven't read any of these books, I hope that you pick them up. They're all really great reads. All right, everyone, I'll see you later.